You can't always give the customer what they want. You often have to give them what they need, because if you just did what they want, you just build a slightly better version of the thing they already had, or a slightly cheaper version.
Thousands of companies show up to sell their technology to the U.S. Department of Defense each year. But so few will transition from proof of concept to true production across the valley of death. The select few who do, their stories are rarely told. Until now. I'm Noah Scheinbaum, and this is Crossing the Valley. Scott Sanders is the Chief Growth Officer of Forterra, the company formerly known as RRAI. Forterra builds ground autonomy systems to keep people safe, both in the defense and commercial sectors. And Scott's one of the most preeminent sales leaders in the industry. He was head of BD at Vannevar Labs and an early mission ops teammate at Anduril, as well as a MARSOC team leader. His superpower is customer discovery. In this conversation, we cover his vision for ground-based autonomy, we discuss how Forterra goes to market, and we talk about what it takes to build venture-scale businesses in defense. Enjoy. All right, everybody. Hey, I'm thrilled today to be joined by Scott Sanders, the Chief Growth Officer at Forterra. Scott, good to see you. Thanks for making some time.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on.
Give us the high level for those who may be newer to this market or may have not heard the brand that is Forterra. What's the company all about?
So at Forterra, we are, like I said, violently passionate about getting humans out of harm's way, both in the defense and commercial industries. We look at, the problem sets that both warfighters and folks who work in the industrial space face every day, and how dangerous some of those jobs are, obviously some more than others. And we look at how do you develop full stack end-to-end ground autonomy systems that enable you to have self-driving cars in these really complex and dangerous environments.
What does it mean to be violently focused on something that is fundamentally about reducing harm and injury?
I think it's just how we approach the space as a company and the culture around how we think about things. I don't think many people around here think about their job as a 9-to-5. They think about it as in terms of mission and how do we support that mission. And whether you're an engineer or a product person or a growth member of the team or member of the growth team, I think people wake up every day going, I'm going to go solve this problem and I'm going to help get this technology into the field and make the world hopefully a better place, but in reality, a different place. This approach that we have is really oriented on sticking true to that mission and making sure that it's not just about, building the best tech or selling the most things. It's about really delivering something for our customers.
Yeah, I think I'm struck by, in that explanation, one of the things you hear often from the investor class is that the best startups are some hybrid of a cult and a religious following, right? It's this kind of maniacal obsession and an irrational belief in kind of the vision that the team, that the leadership team, the founding team lays out. And so it sounds like you guys are bottling that feeling and running it out there. The other thing, Scott, that it provokes for me is you're one of the few people who kind of understands what it takes to go from zero to a relationship with a customer in which the customer is buying a product that you have now invented. And you've done it a few times in the defense tech space. That's really unique, right? I think there's a few people who have done it once. There's a handful of people who have, one handful of people who have done it twice. You're now doing this for your third time from Anduril, from Vannevar, and now at Forterra. So walk us through what is the Scott Sanders way of 0 to 1, going 0 to 1 with government end users and customers.
Yeah, and now that's getting briefed back to me, the question is how insane were those life choices that brought us here today? And anyone who's worked in complex regulatory spaces probably feels the same way. You have this love-hate relationship with your customer. You're doing really cool things, but they can be difficult things to go achieve. It's a very complicated space. But I think that how do you go from 0 to 1 with a customer is, I wish there was some playbook you could follow of just go do this thing and talk to these people and follow this checklist, and you're going to come out on the end and you're going to have this great MTA or program of record or whatever it is. And the reality is like every one of these are different. And I think pairing sort of a mission that you're trying to achieve and finding the right people to do that with on the customer side is really important. I think that when you're first starting a company or you're starting a sales and capture strategy, you're throwing a lot of things against the wall to see what sticks. And people don't do as much diligence on their customer as their customer is doing diligence on them. And you can have the perfect product in the right space and priced in the right way. But if you don't have the right customer partner on the other side that sees the same vision as you, it's really hard to do this. I think of all the contracts that I've worked on, the thing that's always been a standout is the partner on the other side who sees the vision in the same way and has the same aligned goals that you also see. And sometimes you both have to get there together, right? It's a learning environment when you're working in this space. And I think the people that are really good at it, we were talking about Wilco Lincoln earlier, so we'll definitely give him a shout out here. But like, I think violence is something that Will would agree with here. Of like, you have to go create and build trust really fast for the customer. And you think about what growth, sales, account management, whatever you want to call it, PMs in some companies do, especially in defense, is getting customer alignment to an end state. And you can't always give the customer what they want. You often have to give them what they need, because if you just did what they want, you just build a slightly better version of the thing they already had, or a slightly cheaper version. But that's not enough to overcome the momentum inside a highly complex sales environment, especially one that has so much emotional overhead attached to getting on a new contract. So to go from, a bunch of S&T style contracts at something like Forterra, or for no DoD contracts when I started at Anduril, finding that right first mission partner that can grow with you, even if it's not the right long-term partner to scale the company, is really, really important, because you're going to have, if you have a great product, you're going to have a lot of optionality in where you go work. And so finding the right one first is actually really critical. And that's not going to be obvious at first glance.
I mean, I want to dive into that. That's such a great segue. I think the first, like, very tactical question is, how many partners do you say no to before you find that one? Or is it like, hey, all the research is done upstream so that when we approach, we know this is the one?
We do a lot of research on this, actually. And I would say our commercial team, led by a bunch of folks who did a bunch of defense stuff before this, have been really good about this. So what Gabe and Mike do on our commercial team is a lot of research into, and time spent with the customer. It's just a lot of time to go build that trust. Like, humans are inherently pretty bad at trusting other humans, like out the gate, right? We have a fundamental limitation to extend that trust. And so you have to build it over time. And that time could be measured in years. And so what I've got to watch Mike and Gabe do on the commercial team is figure out, like, does this customer just want to do tech innovation? They want to get to a pilot real quick, but are they willing to pay? Are they going to put skin in the game? Are they going to adapt their business model to work with self-driving industrial systems in this case? And it's not always going to be obvious the first time. And you might do a lot of trips to go see these people and talk to them and bring them out to your site and try to find that commonality and that similar mission. But when you find them, it will be very obvious, because they will be pushing you as hard as you're trying to push them. And and especially in the emerging tech or the hard tech space, you're not always going to have a finished product on day one. You're going to have, and you really don't, because if you don't have scale deployments of these things, you're not going to know how it's going to achieve the mission for the customer until it's up and running. And you don't want to build towards, a fully complete end-to-end thing that you've conceived on your own without any input from a wide variety of customers, and especially those ones who are actually those early adopters. And you're trying to create that early adoption product curve that a lot of folks have so eloquently written about in a market where there just isn't that many players, right? A commercial, B2B company or a B2C company is going to get a lot of shots on goal to figure out how to get product market fit. You might get a half dozen in the defense and industrial space, like where we work on the industrial side in the terminal tractor and yard space. 70% of the vehicles in this class are owned by like 12 companies. You can't really mess it up the first time. And so you have to get that aligned vision with them. And there's no magic trick there. It's going and spending time with them and understanding their mission and being a good partner. And a lot of times that means not recommending the thing that you do. Thinking back to some of the early days of counter UAS and the PM that run the program at the time, there was a variety of times that they came asking for something that we couldn't do and that already existed and maybe we could have done. We could have squeaked out some extra R&D money out of them. But the better partner move is to say, hey, we know these guys over here. They do this. Just talk to them. We'd happily work with them.
And why, Scott, drill on that. Why is that the better strategic move?
Because that's how you build long-term trust in someone. And you think about how small defense tech is and really how small the government acquisition professionals are. Like there's not that many of them, all things considered. It's not a huge market. And if you are not truthful and honest with them from the get-go, they're not going to trust you. So it doesn't matter how good your product is. And there's a balance there, right? Like we just talked about not having like the perfect product on day one. So you've got to convince them that like you have enough of a solution and that getting it and deploying it now is going to help you finish out what that product will look like. You know, parts of it might not be complete. Parts of it might be complete, but parts of it might not be because you don't know how a new technology, a new space is actually going to get used by end users. And so if you go concentrate and try to do things from the ground up in a much different way than your customer is ready to do, they might not adopt it, even if they want to. We see this a lot in the industrial robotics space where people try to show up with an end-to-end turnkey solution and the customer's not ready to go lift and rip their entire garbage terminal tractor ops. They want to implement it in stages or in phases. And they've got a very complex system they have to balance. And the DoD is really no different. So you might have the perfect thing, but if it's not sort of, different Lego blocks that you can insert into the process, you actually might have a harder time getting that adopted by your customer. I think when it comes to, someone asks you, in our case, we're not trying to play in the same C2 wars that the Andurils and the Palantirs and the Swarm Arrows and everyone else are playing. And it's a very interesting space. I think it's a very hard space. There's obviously more companies than that trying to do it. So our take is we'll play with anyone. We'll develop an API for Terralink and enable you to command and control from a different platform because that's really the way that we see the direction going. Sure, you can do some of the stuff from the thing we build. We have to build a UI UX to control robots and would happily have someone use that over a different product. But that's like a hill that's not worth climbing. And so I'd rather recommend a great partner who makes a more complete system in that space than trying to pitch my own and trying to grow another vertical that we're not positioned to go grow.
Yeah. So trust is the currency. And what you're really talking about is making sure you don't erode that early, making sure you kind of the battles that you take on are the ones you're going to win. I'd love to make this real now and tangible, which is let's bring it back to Forterra. Scott, there 3 years ago or so, when this kind of iteration of the company began, what did it look like to find that first customer? Whether you can share exactly who it is or not, but on the government side, what did that search look like, and how did you know when you had found them?
The upside of starting from really an applied S&T sort of foundation of, the company been building stuff in this space for a really long time, have been working with all the customers that have been doing robotics. And so it was less about exploring a new space. It was more about sifting through what was the right partner in the right space. I mean, when I started at Forterra about 3 years ago, and we were doing autonomous buses, we were doing flying and driving drones, we were doing a lot of things, and almost none of them were with scale partners. And so it was trying to figure out what are the right program offices to align against inside of the Army or with the Marine Corps or with SOCOM to, that understood where self-driving vehicles are today and what can actually get out and get to users. And then, trying to be a good partner to them on, how should they buy this technology? What should be the spec of the system that they can acquire against today? And where is it going to be in 6 months? And where is it going to be in a year? And even if you know them at the time, the upside and downside of government is those people probably rotate every 24 to 36 months. So you've got to continually rebuild those relationships. And I think more similarly to life as a intelligence officer, previously coming to the commercial world, like your work's never done. Like you're always having to build those relationships. So for us, it was figuring out who has both the burning need for it, whether that's something like Rogue Fires or the ATDS program office inside of the Army for doing autonomous logistics, and just iterating with them over and over and over again to figure out what's the way to get this into warfighters' hands very quickly. Because at the end of the day, you can live in the R&D space for some amount of time, but there has to be a way to get it out into the field. Because if we just do small form factor soldier touch points for a month or a week, and it's different people every time, you're not getting consistent feedback, and you're not getting power users of the technology. And when you're fielding hardware and software on big combat vehicles, there's a lot of emotional overhead that goes into doing that. It's not like a software platform that you can just go spin up 1,000 new users in your AWS GovCloud account and get going. You like actually have to ship metal places.
Yeah.
They're big, dangerous machines.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And how did you all think about what was the core competency? Because I know you did a lot of different things, or the company, Robotic Research formerly had a lot of different things. As you're going out and you're looking at these potential partners, how did you define, okay, this is who we want to be. We're going to say yes to these things, no to these things, beyond the pieces you've spoken to, which is the customer fit. How do you think about the product that you were trying to prioritize?
We try to prioritize things that we thought were militarily relevant. And to us, that means it's got to work nearly every time. And so you might not be deploying the most flashy whiz-bang thing to your users. It's more of like where Android and iPhone were probably 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I'm dating myself here. Of like, Android always had the newest, coolest emerging features, but like your battery might die in 3 hours. Like the iPhone kind of just worked. As a former Android user, like this one I switched, like this thing just doesn't work all the time. I need something that works. You think about how the military uses vehicles, like they use them in very different ways depending on what that vehicle is doing. Something like logistics versus a combat vehicle versus surveillance systems. And we said, okay, what are the most useful core functionalities to doing this, and what are the trades between each one of those systems? And then what we just realized was that you actually had to do a really wide amount of things. You had to be able to do leader follower type technology, which is actually a really hard type of autonomy to do, where you're effectively mapping your environment live and sending those maps back to follow-on vehicles so they can work in GPS-denied environments and still maneuver as self-driving cars effectively behind that lead vehicle. You're really doing what like a Waymo mapping vehicle is doing in real time to follow-on vehicles. They're not just following GPS breadcrumbs, because that obviously wouldn't work in a GPS-denied environment. They have to follow that high-definition map behind a leader follower vehicle. But then you might come to a scenario where there's a new bomb crater in front of that follower vehicle, and it needs to maneuver well outside of the high definition map that was given. So I need to switch into a different type of off-road planner to be able to go navigate off-road terrain. And then I might need to send one of those follower vehicles to go cross country through bushes and shrubbery and swamps to get to a mission point. So we try to think of these user journeys of, well, what am I actually going to do with these trucks, right? Because it's one thing to just go do, or just go have something demonstrate moving at a high rate of speed or through complex terrain. But if it doesn't achieve a goal, it doesn't get a sensor into position or a weapon system standoff from the unit that's using that, or allow you to drop 80 or 90% of your headcount on a logistics movement, then it's just interesting. It's not a product. It's not achieving a goal for your customer. And I think one of the downsides of how the military does R&D is we often don't do it holistically against a mission set. I think the DoD is getting better about this, but it's like, go solve this narrow problem. And then, then we'll figure out the rest down the road. It's like, well, these are really complex systems of systems. And they have to kind of do this from day one. So we focused on the problem sets that would allow us to do complete end-to-end missions. So, and to do it at a very high availability rate, do it all at the edge, do it on mil spec and safety critical hardware, which anyone who's ever worked in the defense space knows that making boxes mil spec is somehow like a dark art. It's just hard to make boxes and cables. Who knew those were like really hard things? And so your algorithms have to run on something. They're not going to run on the cloud. they're going to run on a vehicle that is bouncing around off road. And you've got to build a safety case around how all those things work together. And then you've got to have a way for a user to interact with it and task it and do something, reduce the number of clicks, the amount of operator cognizance on a system. And so thinking about these things as user journeys of what is the actual mission we're going to accomplish, not just the sort of internal advanced R&D that you might be doing to make that more efficient or faster and approach in a different way. And so we aligned against those problem sets. And then we kind of have shifted how we've set up the company to do that really efficiently and, hire the right ops people who can help build things at scale and hit delivery timelines. Because it's one thing to do one of these or 5 of these or 30 of these. It's quite another to do several hundred at a quality rate that's not going to bankrupt you in warranty costs. So just thinking about, you have to think of it not only as a technology system of systems, but also how the business supports those things. Because at the end of the day, the operators wants to work.
Yeah, no, Scott, you're one of the things that in talking with you that comes through is you're really clear and precise at going from a strategic objective to an operational imperative to how your technology kind of integrates with the concept of operations or with that kind of like broader picture. And I'm curious how you guys at Forterra tell that story to and with a customer. What does it look like? Are you bringing them out on a test range? Is it just a PowerPoint presentation? Like how do you actually go about building, you talk about building trust in your personal relationship. How do you build trust in the kind of technological implementation and use case to get them to a place where it's an obvious answer?
There's a couple of ways. One is you're always telling the story with your customer, right? You can't do any of this without your customer. Like we have a lot of veterans at Forterra. I think that's a big advantage as long as it doesn't become a veteran echo chamber, because vets tend to do that. Like our military experiences and our relevancy stopped the day we all left active duty. And that was years ago in a lot of cases. And so you need to stay current on what's happening. Pat Acox, our head of our VP of defense, went out to Ukraine with our head of product for a week to go to the front lines and just see how do the operations here differ from what we all saw in Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan. It's a different type of war. And are we taking the right lessons from it? What are the actual problems you're trying to solve? There's elements in the U.S. military that are trying to solve a certain series of problems that we think will occur in the next war. And those might not be aligned to, what's more realistically happening in Ukraine, where one of their biggest problems is logistics. They can't mass enough weapons or people or water or food to go create decisive engagement to break through lines. There's obviously a lot of other things that make this war very complicated. We're trying to boil this down to some talking points. And how do we get that across? It's like you have to show it live. PowerPoint only gets you so far. And I think a lot of people are skeptical about PowerPoint. I know we are. It's like, yeah, I can show you a video of this. That's helpful. Like people are usually more visual learners. But like come out to the test range and tell us what day. We'll have robots there and go task it to do something and think about it in an operational scenario. So we're lucky that we have a really big test range out in Southern Idaho where we can kind of do within the limits of sanity anything we want. And I can hand an operator Terralink console or ATAC or someone else's C2 system and say, go task a bunch of robots to do something. And the robots should be able to go do a bunch of missions. And you should be able to read a book or do a different task and supervise them. And I think that's the only way you demonstrate how you actually implement autonomy into a concept of operations. Because again, if it doesn't actually serve a warfighter end state, it doesn't really matter. Because someone's going to start using this product. And there's a smattering of failed programs that got to milestone C or got to deployment, and then the users got them and like, what is this thing? And I'll pick on some things. I have no idea who built this thing back in the day, but like, back when I was a special operator, we had these things called BFT talk kits, Blue Force Tracker, Tactical Operations Center kits. And there's this like monstrosity of Pelican cases to like give you Blue Force Tracker at the edge. We had zipper computers that you just go to a website. We have this, but I was required to haul this thing like a 4-year rack of servers around to just get the BFT signal. And like, why? Like we didn't need this. We didn't want this. These things were like $300,000. And we hauled them all over the world because we had to. It was a requirement. You're like, what is this achieving for me? Like maybe this made sense 10 years ago, but it took you 10 years to field this program. And now it's irrelevant. And the DoD wouldn't bought those things. They bought a service contract for them. And it was like, this was just a waste of money. And there's so many stories like that of emerging technology where we're not iterating fast enough. We're not buying things in a more flexible way that allows us to continually compete to get the best product out there. I think aside from major capital expenditures like large trucks and vehicles and ships and tanks, we need to get to a faster iteration cycle and more competition. Like, there's no other way to cycle faster with a product if we continue to try to buy things like, I want to buy this once and just going to sustain it. That might work for a ship. I would argue it probably actually doesn't, besides the actual metal hull. But like everything else that has computers inside of them requires constant development iteration. And you just have to go do that live and tell that story.
I appreciate the detail and walking us through that. One of the things, Scott, that you've shared is that at Forterra, you all did not necessarily take kind of the approach that we see a lot in defense tech, which is start with some R&D contracts, kind of gain some traction, slow roll the development of that relationship, and then go after bigger programs, right? You've talked about kind of only going after big programs early on rather than being R&D led. So talk to us about what does that look like in practice? Maybe we could talk about a specific campaign. Like, how did you all think about getting in the game where you're going for a big program, and what did that entail?
There's a little nuance to the statement of don't do R&D. It's like you're probably taking 6 years money at some point in time, no matter where you're starting. But it's more like if you actually think about how the government's S&T organizations are set up versus the program offices, they are in wholly separate parts of the organization that do not report to each other. And so we like to talk about incentive alignment around here on nearly everything. This is the side effect of having people with economics degrees laying around. It's like, just talk about the incentives, like those will align the market. And there's no incentive to transition an S&T program into production for a variety of reasons. And that can be good and bad. But the downside is that if you are doing something really cool in the S&T org and it's getting bigger, you're probably going to have to go compete that into a program anyway. And while you're in the S&T world, you might be getting great funding contracts. DARPA might come in and help you get moving very quickly, but there's no pathway that glide paths you into a competitive program. And as a DoD, you probably don't want that because yes, your S&T org was off doing something, but what was commercial doing at the same time? Like, you're going to have to go run that competition anyway. And so if you already have a product, you already have a thing you can go start with, you want to align to where the scale programs are, which are almost exclusively inside of the program executive offices within, whether it's the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, or Air Force SysCom and the Marine Corps, and use your private capital to invest ahead of the curve. And the dangerous game is, well, how far ahead of the curve are you going to invest? How much conviction in the market do you have? And how much conviction in your tech stack do you have over what the government sees as requirements? And how can you shape and work with your customer on what those requirements should be? So that you're not just playing the more legacy, the older version of this is you put a quarter in and you get some engineering hours out. If you're waiting to do that cycle, your cycle is going to be very, very slow. And you really need to see where you think the tech is going. And that's why you have to have such a close relationship between engineering, product, and business development. Those things cannot exist in separate silos. You cannot have PD people just out selling a thing that either engineering can't deliver or is way behind what engineering can deliver. You have to do this as a sort of a team approach. And so when you look at those programs, like, the government publishes a budget every year. Using JBooks is a great place to start. Of just like, where are these things today? What stage are they at? What kind of money do they have? Are these programs shaping up for a competition, or is there a transition pathway? And you only learn that from just going engaging with your customers and spending time with your customers. And maybe you want to go create a new program. Well, you got to go create the demand signal for it. And working with end users who ultimately are the receiver of that technology, but you also can't index on them too heavily because they are not fully aligned with what the program office is probably trying to acquire again. So you have this dance that you're trying to do between the Congress, the Pentagon, the program offices, and the end users. And they might never, ever talk to each other. as well.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
No doubt. What's the sales campaign? I mean, you're a master with this stuff. What's the sales campaign you're proudest of?
Especially at Forterra, I think the one that's the most interesting and it's been probably the most amount of work and I think will be the most relevant is Rogue Fires that we do is Oshkosh is the prime on the contract for us and it's been a great partner. They build incredible trucks.
So what is it? What did you do?
We've been working on this program for a while. Actually started before I came here, but it was something that I don't think as a company we took as seriously as we should have from day one, which was it just seemed like another kind of version of what we've been doing with the Army in a different program. And when we started exploring, well, what is the con-op to the system? Like, how is this actually going to enable warfighters to change how the Marine Corps fights, especially as part of force design? It became very obvious that we needed to really work and partner with Oshkosh in a way that allowed us to deliver a more capable system in the long term as partners, and how important that partnership with Oshkosh is. Because we integrate on the factory line with them, that's extremely complex because you're having to have certain parts arrive at certain times, and it's a very complicated system you have to install. But also working with the customer on, is there a better way to buy this? Is there a way that we can iterate faster in the future? And how do you continue to buy down risk for those forces that will be deployed somewhere in the world to defeat enemy shipping from the land? And there are so many parts to it's an operational problem of getting enough things to be able to do that at the scale you need to do it at. How do you work with all of your suppliers and all of your vendors to create a cohesive product? How do you work with the contracting office to deliver this in probably a different way than the customer is used to buying things? How are the operational forces using this? And how does that user feedback get back into your engineering cycle? And from a complexity standpoint, how many players are involved in it? It's, to me, just the most interesting. And doing it with a partnership with someone like an Oshkosh is very different than just priming something by yourself. And the reality is, unless you're trying to build a scale multi-product company in this space, you're going to have to partner. You're not going to make everything, especially if you're an early stage company. We're only 265 people. We're not very big. And so we can't go boil the ocean on these very complicated, how do you put missiles on robots and hand them to Lance Corporal's problem? And so getting all those things aligned and really Chris Seifert, who runs that program on our side, has done a wonderful job of building trust, not only with the customer, but with Oshkosh, and thinking about it not from just, hey, I've got to ship a product, but I have to ship a capability. And how do I do that with all the different players who are involved? Like, it's watching him do this has been incredibly impactful to the company. And, without getting, I think the core mission here is like, if you have the right person on your team that understands the mission, understands technology, can build those partnerships, can build trust, that's really how you get these emerging programs going, because it takes a full focus of effort from someone to build a team and go execute against that.
That's cool. Let's do this one quick, and then we'll pivot to one final kind of topic area. When you guys get that right, when Rogue Fires is wildly successful, what does that change for the warfighter?
I think the thing it changes for the warfighter is the ability to mass very high-end fires with a distributed force in a way that would previously just take a huge human footprint. And so we think about the emergence of especially standoff weapons in general. They were really great in Afghanistan and Iraq, right? You could call your friend at the HIMARS battery and telephone pole is full of high explosive and just show up at a 10-digit grid moments later. But there's a lot of complexity to that we kind of just like fluffed away in the war on terror, which is you're shooting something just short of like low Earth orbit in some cases. There's a lot of things happen in the air that you have to really think about and deploy to do so in a meaningful way. And I think something like Rogue, where you have anti-ship ballistic missiles, Gimler's rockets, and some other capabilities, give the Marine Corps to keep their footprint relatively low and still project an incredible amount of force, far more than you can do with air-based drones. And to do so in a way where when someone inevitably shoots back, you're out a truck. Newsflash to everyone, Oshkosh will make you more trucks. They love doing it. They're great at it. They're happy to do it. And you can't replace the people, not nearly as quickly as you can replace the trucks. Never mind the sort of the moral imperative to protect human lives. So it'll give them an ability to really create standoff that just doesn't exist currently, because we have to have people in those vehicles to do that job.
Yeah, appreciate that. It's a It's a well stated description. So I know we just have a few minutes left, Scott. I want to zoom out for a minute and just kind of come back to you and your background in marine special operations, to Anduril, to Vannevar, to now at Forterra. As you look at, this industry and how it's evolved even in the last 5 years, ton more companies, ton more venture investment. Some would say still not at the levels that we need, but certainly the investment has outpaced kind of government's adoption of kind of what's coming out here. What do you see in the industry that is exciting, and what do you see that is concerning for you as an American, as an operator in the space, and as somebody who's obviously working hard on defense modernization?
The thing that I think is exciting is when I got out of the military and walked into 10 people in a shed trying to build the first iteration of Lattice, it was actually relatively controversial to go work in defense tech. It was hard to hire engineers. It was hard to get people to think of that as a career. Like, I think at the time, like most of my friends who got out at the same time went into consulting, they went into banking, they did sort of the traditional career paths, and it was non-standard to go to a defense tech company because that wasn't a thing. And now it's become a thing. I think it's great. I think having people focus on national security is really how we built the basis of American power in the 50s and 60s and 70s, right? Everyone contributed to defense in some way, and we created this huge tech ecosystem that gave us Silicon Valley. It gave us the venture cycles that we have today. It created a framework for this, and we all had this shared mission of how do we position the West as the sort of the dominant governmental system. And the fear that I have is that the DoD isn't really set up to have that many vendors. We've optimized on a system that reduces, favors kind of a stringent bureaucracy and procuring systems for a lot of right reasons. But it makes it hard for all the exciting tech that's coming into the space to actually find a home. And the second part of that is, unless you are building a multi-product company inside of defense kind of from day one, it is really hard to get to venture return scale as a single product defense focused company. And there's a lot of risk. You might be building a really cool capability, but there might be only one PEO who buys that. And if you don't win, it's a zero, right? And venture is set up for that. But it means that your probabilities of having enough outcomes in this market is pretty low. And so, our strategy on this is that we are very much a defense tech company. We're excited to work on national security. But we also know that there's other markets that we have to address in the commercial space to be able to get to venture scale. Maybe that thesis changes over the years as we continue to see success in the defense space, and maybe we do more multi-product things in defense. But I think a lot of companies that are starting today are starting on the thesis of we're going to build a single product, and that's going to get us to venture scale. And there's like very few outcomes where that works inside of DoD. And so my fear is that if there are not enough winners, that the venture investment doesn't stick around for the end of the game. And I think people should be more concerned about that, especially at the valuations some deals are getting done.
So what advice, if you have one piece of advice for founders or even for operators who want to work in the industry, founders who want to build, operators who want to work, what's one piece of advice you got for them?
Manage your costs. It's the only thing you can control.
Short and to the point. We love it. Scott, last question, and then we'll let you go. If folks want to specifically work with Forterra or to learn more about what y'all are doing, follow along on the journey, what's the best way for them to do that?
Hit us up on our website. Reach out to us. We always make time to talk to folks who care passionately about this space, and we're consistently hiring and looking for top talent that wants to go work on these problems.
All right. That's Forterra.com right? Am I getting that right?
That's correct. We got the .com. So we're excited about that.
Love that. Forterra.com. If you want to learn more, you want to reach out to the team. Scott, thanks so much for taking the time. You're a wealth of insight. You're a resource for this community and for the industry, and you're advancing the ball on some critical missions. So appreciate your time with us, and wishing you the best of luck as you guys keep growing.
Awesome. Thanks, Noah.